Everybody. We are here tonight for a special meeting of the Planning Commission to discuss the housing element with the state. As always, the first item on our agenda is going to be the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'll ask everyone rise, place your hand on your heart, face the flag, and follow after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and Eduardo, could we have a roll call, please?
This thing, Commissioner Keldorf, he will be absent today, excused. Commissioner Magai has notified us that he'll be about 20 minutes or half hour late, but he will be here. Commissioner Heschler.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Newman.
He is present.
Chair Baldino.
Present. All right. Thank you, Eduardo. Great. And as Eduardo mentioned, Commissioner Nege will be joining us late, but we'll have a quorum at all times during the meeting. Okay, next on the agenda is public communication, and this will be for anything that's not on the agenda. And again, we're talking about the presentation of the 2021 through 2029 housing elements. So if there's anyone on the Zoom meeting who wants to make a general public comment, now would be the time. I'd ask that you signal on the Zoom if you'd like to be heard at this time. So Eduardo, please let me know if you see anyone communicating they'd like to speak in public communications.
We will do so.
All right, well, not seeing anyone, I'll go ahead and close public communications. Next item on the agenda is written communications. Are there any additional written communication besides what we provided in the agenda packet?
No other written communications.
All right. Consent calendar, there's nothing there, which brings us to the next item is new business. And we're here today, as I said, we'll have a community meeting to introduce the draft 2021-29 housing element, discuss and obtain input from the Planning Commission and members of the public. So can we have a report, please?
Yes, Chair Baldino, I'm going to introduce Veronica Tam with Veronica Tam and Associates, who's the city's consultant, helping us with the preparation of the housing element. Veronica will go over some general information about housing elements, just so that people get familiar with the concept if they're not already. And then she will delve into kind of summarizing what is in the draft housing elements that we're presenting to you today. With that, I'll hand it off to Veronica.
Thank you. Can I confirm that the PowerPoint is projected?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. So yes, what I would like to do tonight is give an overview of the housing element, what we're doing, why we're doing, and where we're at in terms of the housing element update. The city has already conducted a couple of meetings in the past relating to the development of the housing element. But just for the benefit of the general public, I would just go over some of the key basics about the housing element anyway. The housing element is part of your general plan. It's one of the 7 mandated elements of the general plan. It sets the goals, policies, and objectives regarding housing in the community, identify the needs, and how we are going to address the needs. It really is looking not only about the current needs in your community, but we also need to look at the projected needs, particularly as it relates to this whole concept of regional housing needs allocation. We'll go into that a little further later on. The housing element is a little bit different from the rest of the general plan, that it has a very specific time frame. This housing element is an 8-year planning document, as opposed to other general plan elements that typically has a 20-25-year horizon. For specifically what this update we're working on is an 8-year from October 15 to October 2021 to October 15, 2029. We have until 120 days from the statutory deadline to adopt a housing element, which sets it to February 2022. This housing element also has to be reviewed by a state agency for compliance with state law. The agency responsible for that is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. So throughout this whole process of the housing element or the regional housing needs allocation situation, you've heard a lot about the whole the agency HCD, and you will continue to hear about them quite frequently in the future. The housing element is legally required to plan for housing that may be built by within the city of El Segundo. It's a planning document. It's not a development document. So the city doesn't develop housing. You plan for it from a land use perspective, land use and development standards, making sure that that you have the ability to accommodate that many units within your community. But the private sector actually builds the housing, at least the vast majority of the housing units. You can, as a local jurisdiction, use funding, policy, and programs to incentivize housing to be developed in your community to meet the needs of your community. But you're setting the stage for housing development to occur within your community, but you're not the one that's building the units, and you're not obligated to make sure that the units get built. The market builds the units. When we sent the housing element to the state for review, the most critical component of that review is something called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, RHNA. Every jurisdiction in California gets an allocation. Now, by definition, this is not necessarily the housing need generated from within the city of El Segundo. This is the share of the region's housing needs that you're being responsible for as part of the region. The RHNA comes from the state. It looks at how much growth is going to occur within the state for the next 8-10 years. The State Department of HCD and in coordination with the Department of Finance come up with that projection to be about 3.5 million units. And each region in the state gets an allocation. Within the Southern California Association of Governments region, which is a 6-county region, in Southern California, we were given assigned an allocation of 1.34 million units. Within that, the county of LA got the lion's share of it because it's the largest county within the region. Each jurisdiction within the county also gets an allocation, and the city of El Segundo gets 492 units. Granted, this is a lot larger than what you had received before. The 5th cycle housing element or the 4th cycle housing element is significantly smaller than some of your neighboring jurisdictions, recognizing some of the constraints that the city has as the local community. So this regional housing needs allocation, it's a 6th cycle, as we mentioned before, 492. However, there is a little wrinkle right there. In the 5th cycle housing element, the city was committed to providing affordable housing, meeting its regional housing needs allocation with the 540 Imperial Avenue specific plan. That project ultimately did not have any affordable units in it, and that's the reason why the city was able to receive a $5.3 million funds in lieu of providing the affordable housing. Based on state law, we are required to carry over the lower income RHNA from the previous planning period into the 6th cycle. We don't have to carry forward anything that's not built for the moderate or above moderate income. We're only required to carry forward the lower income, and that's generated from the school site, the Imperial Avenue, a specific plan that we received the $5.3 million for. So overall, your obligation or your responsibility is about 521 units. And this is the income distribution, about 40% being very low and low income, very low and extremely low, and 19% for low income, and about 41% of that being moderate and above moderate income. So how do we, as a jurisdiction, how as a community, meet the challenge of this RENA number? Again, 551 units is it doesn't seem like a large number for some communities. It is large for the city of El Segundo, but you are able to take advantage of the trend of accessory dwelling units in the community. Based on units that's been permitting in the community, we should be able to project a similar trend into the future for about 10 units per year and 80 units over the next 8 years. The income distribution of the ADUs is based on a survey conducted by SCAG, and that's been approved by the state for the purpose of the housing element. This is the income distribution of the ADUs that we're allowed to use. And so this is, we'll be meeting a good number of our RENA obligation with the ADUs projected. You also have a couple of projects that have entitled units that we can take credit for, as long as they're not being issued building permit before July 1st this year. We're able to take credit for that. And we also have the Pacific Commons project that is pending, that is giving you a large number of units, 263 units specifically. 32 units are going to be affordable to lower income households. Based on the current kind of discussions, we understand that it would be 3 very low income and 29 low income units. So again, with these pending entitled and ADU projects, we've met a good chunk of your RENA, but primarily in the market rate category, not in the lower income category. So that's the reason why during the last 6 months or so, the city has gone through really diligent effort in identifying candidate sites for rezoning. In order to facilitate and accommodate the low and moderate income that you have remaining to accommodate. And so the sites inventory has gone through a lot of discussions before the public. And so in summary, based on the candidate sites, and we try to use a mixed income strategy for some of the larger sites, and we're able to meet the RENA with a fairly comfortable buffer, which is required by the state. We have to provide a buffer should some of the projects being built on the site are not going to have any affordable units on it. We would have the ability to accommodate the lower income units, so that the situation like Imperial Avenue specific plan would not occur, and therefore carry forward the RENA for the next cycle.
How is that buffer amount determined? Is that a set percentage?
The state recommends between 15 to 30% of the, well, at the minimum 15, but at the average about 30%. And here between the low and moderate, very low income, we are at about 25%. I think that's where we're averaging to about 25% of the buffer that's requested by the state. The buffer is based on the sites and how we estimate the capacity.
So is 15% the minimum, or is there a minimum?
15% is the recommended minimum.
Okay.
Yeah, and at most of the time we try to get to 30%, because anything you build at market is going to be not affordable. That's the bigger the buffer you have, the more comfortable you will be. Otherwise, if you fall into a situation where you run out of sites because you built a lot of the units at market rate and you don't have any sites remaining for affordable anymore, you're not allowed to approve the project until you've identified replacement sites within 6 months.
Veronica, can I also ask on the ADU line?
Sure.
How does SCAG collect data for the income levels on for ADUs?
They did a 6-county rent survey through like online resources, and then they looked at the type of ADUs, whether it's like a guest house or it's a small unit, it's a comparable unit by region. And they align the rent with the income and affordability of different groups by county. And so LA County is divided into 2 areas in terms of the income distribution. There's like in the South Bay area and the West Side area, there's one distribution, and then in the other side, like San Gabriel Valley, that kind of areas, there's a different income distribution. But that survey has I don't remember the exact number of rental listing they've done, but they certainly did a very elaborate analysis and then submitted that to the state for review, and the state approved that to be used as assumptions that we can use in the housing element.
Okay, thank you.
So to be clear, no one is verifying whether or not our ADUs are low income, very low income. This is just an extrapolation based on some study done in the county.
Correct, but they do recommend that when you actually build ADUs, you collect information to kind of monitor how far off you are.
But Veronica, this is my services director, Chair Baldino. I just want to clarify. Although that's a recommendation, that's not something that we're doing at this time. Or
yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, this is over the counter approval process, and now the state wants us to take personal financial information. Okay, right. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, that was crazy. Thank you.
Okay. So here's a map of the sites that you have probably seen many times by now. It's the selection of the sites try to provide a variety of locations and really what makes sense in terms of some of the commercial areas being recycled into higher density residential. But I didn't want to go into details about the sites because it has actually fed through the process quite a bit in the past 6 months or so. So the housing element also has programs to go with it, and rehabilitation program. The city used to have a couple of rehabilitation programs, but you don't have that anymore. But there are certainly some housing units that can benefit from that. Particularly, you used to have the program to help households to do sound insulation, but that's not available anymore. So the housing element is committed to pursuing funding to reinstate some kind of single-family rehabilitation assistance for, especially for some of the lower-income households or seniors. Code compliance, that is certainly something that the city continue to do. Accessory dwelling units is a new requirement under state law that you're required to facilitate the development of ADUs. So what kind of tools that and assistance the city is going to pursue in order to facilitate the development of ADUs, because we actually did project about 80 units. So the city is obligated to facilitate the development of ADUs, at least to reach the 80 units projection. Your most significant tool for the housing element for affordable housing is really your inclusionary housing ordinance that is underway, and the affordable housing strategy that is to be developed by many mentions. This is really exciting to hear about because the city does have the $5.3 million from the Imperial Avenue project that will be kind of used to kickstart the affordable housing programs in the city. And your inclusionary ordinance, once if and when it's adopted, would also generate potentially either housing affordable units on site, which will be managed by many mentions, or it would generate additional inclusionary in lieu fees that would be deposited into your affordable housing trust funds. So those that is probably going to be the most significant program for El Segundo in the next 8 years. Provision of adequate sites, that is a requirement under state law to make sure that we meet the regional housing needs allocation to maintain an inventory of sites. And this monitoring of no net loss programs is the buffer that I was referring to earlier, that as you develop your sites and you're not getting as many affordable units as you are required to provide, then do you continue to have sites available to meet your RHNA? It's a requirement in state that you do a project by project monitoring of how you progress towards meeting your RHNA. One thing I do want to mention in the provision of adequate sites, as required by state law, all the sites that are being rezoned would have a requirement to provide by right approval of the project if the project includes 20% affordable to lower income households. So that's a state law requirement, and that the city needs to make sure that how it works with your inclusionary program.
Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. State law requires that on the sites that you're rezoning for affordable housing, that for lower income household, and the rezoning occurs after October 15, 2021, like this year, then you're required to provide approval by right in the ministerial process if the project includes 20% of the units as affordable to lower income.
So if we approve this proposed plan with all these overlay sites, and then later we have to modify our general plan, right?
Right.
And then someone can come along and pick any one of these sites, and as long as they have 20% affordable housing, we have no say in whether or not that project goes forward. They can build that as a matter of right.
Correct.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Provided that they meet the standards and development standards, they can, if they don't meet the standards, then they still have to go through the site plan review and all that, but in an objective way. But they still have to meet your development standards.
Yeah, over the counter without any public hearing or public input.
Correct.
Okay.
Lot consolidation. Some of your sites are small, and the state really is looking for sites that is at least half an acre in order to facilitate lower income housing. And also generally in order to facilitate affordable housing, the project needs to be at least about 40 units or more in order to make it a financially feasible project. So having a lot consolidation program is important. This is an existing program that the city has. We're carrying it forward because it is required based on how your site inventory looks like today. Municipal code and amendment. Since 2017, the state has adopted a lot of new state laws relating to housing, particularly housing for special needs population. So you will be amending the zoning code to address some of these new state laws like density bonus, well, I think you have done your ADU ordinance already, but density bonus, something called the supportive housing, and supportive housing meeting certain standards would be treated as a residential use, permitted where residential uses are permitted. Low barrier navigation centers, those are centers where homeless persons would be waiting when the formerly homeless people would be waiting when they're transitioning to permanent housing. You would need to permit that in your mixed use and multifamily zone. So a lot of these are basically state law that you have to amend your code to comply with state law. And last but not least is the fair housing program. The housing element law changes the most in the whole concept of housing, fair housing, in that the housing element, the site inventory, and the provision of affordable housing has to be done in a manner that really encourages distribution, access to resources and opportunities, not concentrated in particular areas. So the housing element includes a program on fair housing that include actions that the city is going to address those topics. So relating to the next steps, the city has already kind of initiated the mitigated net debt back in June to anticipate the site inventory. the city finalized the site inventory in September, including the draft housing element. We are expecting to submit the draft housing element to the state for review by the end of next week. And we are finalizing the document by December, when at the end of the HCD review, we will get comments from the state, and we will have to consider the state's comments and make revisions before we move on to adoption. So at this point, we're trending to have January 13 as the Planning Commission meeting and February 1st for the City Council meeting for the adoption of the housing element, and then it will move forward to the state for final certification. So that would be done within the 120-day grace period that we mentioned before. With that, I conclude my presentation and be happy to answer any questions.
Veronica, is every city in California kind of on the same timeline? Is everyone kind of rushing to get this done?
They are staggered. San Diego region, their requirements was they were required to update it by April this year. And SCAG region is by October this year, and the Bay Area is by January 31st, 2023.
Thank you.
A quick question for that report. There was two things that I might have missed, and I apologize if I did. You show on a couple of slides previously that there was an excess number of 40%, 6% of surplus, and what I'm not sure. Like, if we're only supposed to have a particular number, why are we over projecting in this department? Why are there so many more opportunities?
The majority of that is actually you've met your above moderate income primarily already. So the surplus came from the above moderate income, not necessarily from the lower income side. The lower income, when we look at it, is a surplus of 99 units. There's a total only of 99 units of surplus in the low and moderate income. The surplus in the above moderate income based on almost primarily like your current projects that you have entitled or it's underway already. For the actual sites inventory for the lower income and moderate income for RENA, it's only a 99 unit surplus, and you are required to have a buffer because the state
you said 15%, yes? 15% about?
I recommend a minimum.
Okay.
And what the state law says is that as your site is developed, because you're not okay, even if you're going to have an inclusionary ordinance, let's just do a simple math. And I don't know what percentage your inclusionary housing ordinance is going to be. Assuming that you're going to adopt an inclusionary program that requires 10% of the units to be affordable. So every project that you build, you're only going to get 10% lower income. The 90% is not going to be affordable. So when you develop on a site, you are losing some of the capacity for lower income RENA. So you want to make sure that you have a buffer, a surplus, so that when you develop on a site and you lose some of the capacity, you have something else to actually as a backup.
All right, I get that. I appreciate that. And then I had just one more very obvious question. If you could go forward a little bit on the map that you didn't really want to drill down into, which is fine. I've never gotten a clear question about why we have nothing east of Pacific Coast Highway.
That I'm going to have to defer to city staff.
Okay. Anybody like to take that?
jump in on that and provide some background. That topic has been brought up several times over the last few years, and I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, the city was qualified for an actual grant to do a study of the east part of town to see whether we could change our zoning rules to accommodate residential. And at the time, the city council sort of turned down that opportunity to go forward with residential east of town. So generally speaking, there's kind of a policy of kind of not pursuing that. But within the confines of the housing element update process, we did look at the east part of town, and we looked at sites on the east part of town. And using the state's criteria, we did not find a lot of sites, very few sites that would qualify according to the state's guidelines. So that's kind of the immediate reason for not including sites east of Pacific Coast Highway.
So if we had sites identified, and you obviously know what the criteria is. So the criteria, logically speaking, in my mind, when we've got derelict buildings that are on east of PCH, opposed to the density that we already have here in the residential part of El Segundo that we're looking at developing, short of what's on PCH itself. Is it a city council opportunity to open those floodgates again to allow that to happen? You said a few years ago things were different. A few years later, things are different today. So it would seem to me that we should be exploring that further. Yeah. Because it would only make sense. It would only make sense and I know a lot of the reasons why, old history and all of that. And I know that there has to be ways that we've got a fairly progressive city council these days that would be able to look at that objectively and to maybe create some opportunities over there. I just think that it's silly at this juncture to take a look at for the next 10 years and not have that as an opportunity to be able to have the private sector develop that over there. I just think that's, and I know we're last minute. Here we are scrambling. I just think that it's a lost opportunity. I really do. And I like that. Just want to be on the record for that. That's all.
Commissioner Newman, Paula, if I just, when we can move on to the next thing, but I think that's an excellent point, and I think we should take note of that, as it relates to policy direction, as a policy recommendation that could be included in the draft housing element. Again, the goal of the map that you're seeing now is just to show theoretical capacity to be able to accomplish the affordable production of the production of affordable units. This just shows capacity. It doesn't prevent us from, as Paul mentioned, exploring that down the road. And so I think what you're bringing up, and it may not be exclusive to just east of PCH, it might include other areas of the city that the commission wishes us to look in the next 10 years for potential housing development, not exclusive to affordable housing, but just housing development in general. And that could wind up as a policy recommendation that then council can take action on as part of the housing element as well.
Well, Brenda, I agree this is a conversation we have to have, but it's not a conversation we can have before this document is due. That's going to be a discussion. We're going to have to look at the tax consequences, the impacts on our school district. There are a lot of things that need to be done. So I would not be in favor of slapping anything in this report and sending it to the state out of fear of what the state interprets that to be, until we as a community have come together and have several meetings to discuss this idea of expanding housing to that side of PCH. I think, like Mr. Allen said, right now we're under our deadline to find this capacity, and we've got to deal with kind of the sites that we've been given. But I do agree, we should be talking about that, but that's going to be a many meeting process over several years. So that's going to be our second 10-year housing element. But I do not want anything in this report about housing east of PCH because we haven't even broached it. Okay. But I think it's a valid point, Brenda. I'm glad you brought it up. Is there someone in this presentation who's going to explain this map and explain to the citizens why these sites were selected?
I think, Paul, if you can, sorry, go ahead, Paul. I was just going to say, if you can walk them through the site selection process and how it was narrowed down, I think that would be helpful context.
Veronica, did you want to start on that, on the state criteria, what they are?
Sure. When it comes down to site selection, and what qualifies as a site for lower income housing particularly, is that the site has to be at least half an acre, and if it's not half an acre, then it needs to be contiguous parcels that can be grouped together and achieve at least half an acre. It cannot be larger than 10 acres. You don't have a lot of that, obviously, but the state also doesn't like very large sites either. And it also has to have a density that's 30 units to the acre or more to facilitate lower income. And that's why the rezoning, the overlay and the mixed use, the housing overlay and the mixed use overlays are primarily going over the 30 units to the acre, because one, we don't have a lot of sites, and therefore we need the density to facilitate that. In selecting the sites, most of the time they look at what is the existing uses. We excluded primarily a lot of the existing residential uses because a lot of the existing residential uses are already at higher density than what the city currently allows. And also we exclude sites that are currently multifamily, such as condos and apartments, because they are not financially feasible to demolish existing housing and build more housing. You're not netting in a lot of units. So we do look at areas that are commercial and primarily that is considered to be underutilized because they have large parking area. So the existing square footage on the buildings are limited, so that there's more gain when you do reuse the sites into higher density that will improve the value of the property. So primarily commercial corridors, access to public transportation, access to long transportation corridor, those are also the key reasons for selecting certain sites. But primarily existing uses, whether they're along commercial corridors, whether they have the adequate size, and whether the uses are looking at that buildings may be old, that they're not, that they would, to accommodate modern uses, they may take a lot of rehabilitation or improvements. And so those are some of the key reasons for selecting the sites.
And I would just add just a quick note that, Chair Baldino, you mentioned this, I think, when we were talking about the east of PCH, you mentioned impacts to the school district. So in other words, the presence of different amenities or services in the area was another of the criteria that was considered. So, and also environmental constraints. So east of Pacific Coast Highway, for example, we had historically a lot of heavy industrial uses. So there's a lot of sites, for instance, that have contamination issues. There are properties that have restrictions on them for that reason. So that's just a couple of more examples of the guidelines and the criteria that we used in the site selection process.
So for these properties that have been selected for the overlay zone, what communication has the city or the consultants have with the property owners to find out if they're okay with us rezoning their land?
Yeah, I wanted to report to you on that. Actually, yeah, we did contact the property owners by mail a couple of weeks ago. to notify them that their properties are included in this site inventory and that we are having this meeting tonight. I heard from one of the property owners and had a brief conversation on the phone. And the question that this particular property owner asked me was, am I required to redevelop my property as a result of this? And I simply explained that the housing element would essentially give them an additional option in the future to develop residential on their property if they chose to do so. So we did contact the property owners directly and the tenant.
Okay, is there anyone to talk to why these? I get the general idea of what the criteria are from the state, but who's going to speak to why we chose, 2 churches, a Catholic school, and a parking lot?
Well, these sites on the site inventory generally met more of the criteria, or most of the criteria, versus all the other sites that were considered. Just as a refresher or a reminder, we did go through a process of elimination. In other words, all the properties in the city were considered, and then we applied each of the criteria to all the properties and gradually eliminated categories of properties. So, for instance, very small lots. If you apply that half-acre sort of criterion, that eliminates a huge number of properties. And then you go through the criteria one by one and compare all the sites that are left to the criteria. You end up with a small list, which is more or less what you see here today.
And if I may add to it, churches actually, recently the state changed the state law about allowing churches to build affordable housing on site. And this actually has become a very popular trend because it meets the mission of the church for providing affordable housing. And many mentions, in fact, has been assisting other jurisdictions in creating affordable housing on church sites, and not necessarily removing the church sites, but how to redesign the sites and provide housing, or maybe convert portions of the church buildings into housing. This is a very growing trend in California.
Okay. Is there more to the presentation?
That's it. So.
All right, unless there's any other clarifying questions, I'd like to open it up for public communication.
Chair Baldino, if I may.
Sure.
Hi, this is Kevin McGuy. Sorry,
Kevin.
I'm late. Thanks for accommodating me, and I apologize. I'm going to be off camera for a little bit.
That's
but
okay.
I did just want to confirm a few things. So the properties selected, because they're selected, they're not required to do anything, first off. And then second, other properties can be developed. And third, the only thing is that if they're on the list, then they cannot be included in future housing limits. Are all those things correct? Can you confirm all those?
Absolutely correct. We are creating overlays, which means the underlying zoning, it continues. So if a property owner wants to continue to operate exactly the way they want to, or redevelop it exactly the way they want to, they've been operating, that's certainly fine. But the overlay gives them the flexibility in the future, should they want to sell, and developer can come in and do housing. So it doesn't obligate them to do anything. The other question the comment you have is, just because you're on the overlay, it doesn't obligate you to build. Just because you're not in the overlay doesn't mean that if you're properly zoned for residential development that you could not build housing. You can equally build housing as long as your zoning allows you to build housing the same way. What it differentiates is that these properties, I think you might have missed that part of the presentation, pursuant to state law, these properties would get by right approval of housing if the project includes 20% affordable to lower income. Now, that doesn't happen very often because it's very expensive to build affordable housing, but it just depends on whether it is an affordable housing developer who comes in with funding and build affordable housing. If that is the case, then they do get by right approval if there is at least 20% of the units being affordable to lower income.
Okay.
And Veronica, can you speak to the last question regarding the future use of these sites in the next housing cycle?
In the next housing cycle, if we do identify them as a site for the RHNA this cycle, and it didn't get built, because again, you're not obligated to build, it's the market that builds. So the 7th cycle of the housing element comes along. We don't know what that RHNA is going to be. It can be smaller, it can be larger, it just depends on the economic condition at the time. And you want to reuse this site for your low-income RHNA for the 7th cycle, then it would enjoy the same by right approval if the project includes 20% affordable.
So if we reuse a site, then, it's still that 20% affordable is required?
Right.
Okay.
For by right.
Right. Did that answer your question, Kevin?
It did. Yes. Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
I also might suggest that if one of those sites were developed and it became something else, let's say, you were expecting that it might be a mix of affordable and low income, but it was developed to market rate, that site would likely not be on the list the next go around because chances are it wouldn't be redeveloped in the next 10 years. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
So it just depends on what the size of your 7th cycle RHNA is, and at that point, how you're going to deal with that.
Thank you. Chair Baldino, you had asked for clarifying questions. Would now be the appropriate time to ask on some questions on specifics?
Yeah, and then once you're done, I've got some questions from Chair Keldorf that I'm going to ask for Paul so that they're on the record as well. So go ahead and ask your questions, Kevin. And then once I ask Commissioner Keldorf, if we're all done with our clarifying questions, then we'll get to the public comments.
Okay, well, I had some specifics on the housing element document, so I can jump into those. So, and mine are kind of focused on the goals and policies included in the document. My first one is, so there's a lot of emphasis on ADUs and being able to provide affordable housing units. And maybe I'm not connecting the dots. What guarantees or what says that they're going to be affordable housing? It seems like ADUs, the rate will be set by the individual property owner. Right. So I mean, they don't have any requirements for one rental unit to be affordable. So can you connect the dots for me there, please?
Sure. ADUs consider a potential source of affordable housing, but you're right. Like at market, we don't know whether they're affordable or not. But a lot of times, the state would accept an ADU being an affordable unit if it's being used by family members that are not charging rent. However, what we have done in the housing element is that we can take credits for the ADU trend in the community. And based on your historical trend between 2018 and 2020, a 3-year average, we're allowed to take advantage of about 10 units per year, estimate 10 units per year. Over the course of 8 years, you get 80 units. Now, the income distribution, it's based on a study conducted by SCAG, pre-approved by the state, that we can use that income distribution based on the rent survey conducted by SCAG to kind of allocate our projected units. And that's how it comes from. But it doesn't actually obligate you that, that you're going to have to meet, when you build your ADUs, that you're going to have to meet those income levels.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't guarantee that it's going to be affordable housing.
No, but it does, as part of the housing element, the state does require state law that's requires to facilitate the development of ADUs. And so in the housing element, we have like objectives to develop incentives to facilitate ADUs. Now, it can be up to the city to and part of the objective too is to look at funding at the state level, because it's actually not cheap to build an ADU unit. It's quite expensive. So some of your neighbors, some of your cities in the state, they're pursuing state funds to help a homeowner build ADUs, and in exchange for that assistance, they can require the ADUs to be provided for as affordable housing. That's something that you could pursue in the future, but it's not a requirement.
Okay, thank you. My next question, this may be for city staff, but are we actively trying to refund the rehab assistance program? I think that's a pretty important program. And I mean, it was, tied to goal number 1. So I figured it was important, but I think it's particularly important for renter occupied housing. Not all landlords are created equal. And I've heard some horror stories about how landlords keep up their rental properties. Are we trying to refund that program?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear exactly which program you were referring to.
The rehab assistance.
Yeah, let me try at this point. The city used to have 2 rehab programs. One is the minor home repair. One is the sound insulation program. Both of them are unfunded right now. So the housing element does include actions to pursue funding for it. What I think what you just mentioned is not included in the housing element at this time is rental rehab. But if it is a desire of the community to incorporate that as an objective, that certainly can be included in the housing element. And when many mentions develop the affordable housing strategy, maybe that's something that they can also consider how to spend the money.
Okay, I didn't realize that it was only for, I guess, owner-occupied facilities then, or properties?
Right now they are.
Okay. Okay, and then my next question, the Further Fair Housing initiative. Mm-hmm. So we have as a policy to promote some of the efforts for equal opportunity housing. And how do we know if our efforts are effective? Because I looked reading through the document when I got to Appendix C, Table C13, it says that we have 0 home ownership from our Black, Hispanic, and Pacific Islander communities. So are our efforts for equal opportunity housing working if we have those kind of surprising numbers?
Well, one, you do not have a lot of African American in your community, but I think that's the reason why you're having your inclusionary housing is an affordable housing strategy developed. It would be important kind of tool in the future to provide for affordable housing. And I'm sure when many mentions and your selected consultant to do the which is a very reputable nonprofit affordable housing organization, then they would work to really seek to diversify the opportunities and the availability of housing to all types of households.
Okay, yeah, that was a surprising number that all these ethnic groups essentially are zeroed out for the home ownership section. So my next question, so the energy conservation section, it seems pretty fluffy. Are those all voluntary actions?
Correct.
Okay, are there any mechanisms to make them mandatory for some residences? I'm actually thinking about for multi-unit properties. Which I don't know if, I know we have a lot of landlords in town, and they're probably saying, why would you target multi-unit? But here's my thinking. So California, the electric rates in California have gone up more in the past few years than any other state, and they're going to keep going up. If you own your own home in a single family residence, you have more control. You can put on solar. You have other options because you own the property. People who live in apartments, they don't have that option, so they're going to be disproportionately impacted by the rising cost of electricity. Is there a way that we can encourage or strongly encourage landlords to put these energy efficiency and alternative energy type of improvements on their property?
Kevin, let me jump in. Kevin, if we wanted to do a citywide policy about encouraging environmental conservation, we can do that outside of this housing element report. What we're talking about here is we're trying to satisfy the requirements of the state to get this plan done by October. But if there are other things the city can do above and beyond what's in this housing element. So I think if you want to focus on environmental or what we can do for multifamily development, we can do that separately and a part of getting this process done and up to the state for approval. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. I understand the process that we're going through right now and what the urgency is for, what approvals we have to get, but it is a part of the, it is included in the housing element. And we can talk about it later if that's your preference, Chair.
No, I don't mind bringing it up. I just know there's not enough time between now and when this has to go to Sacramento for us to start, discussing, because we would need public input, we would need community input before we put any type of new restrictions or anything on building in the city.
Okay, sounds good. That was my last question.
Okay, and Paul, I know you got that email from Commissioner Keldorf. She reviewed everything and wrote down some questions. Would you do us a favor and go through her questions and give short responses or responses that are required for those? Do you have that email, or do you want me to ask you the questions?
No, I have the email, so I will read the questions and then provide some brief responses.
Okay, do everyone a favor. Michelle is very adept in all the terminology, so when she has a bunch of letters together, explain to us what she's talking about, all right?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the first question she had was, has there always been a medium density residential floating zone in Smoky Hollow? So that is something similar to the overlays that are being proposed in the housing element, in the draft housing element. It exists in the Smoky Hollow neighborhood and a part of Smoky Hollow just north of Grand Avenue near PCH. So it affects a few properties about 3 blocks of the city. And we've always had this overlay or floating zone in the Smoky Hollow area. It was actually activated about 20 years ago for a residential development on the northwest corner of Grand Avenue in Kansas. And there are still a few parcels in that same area that have the NDR floating zone designation. The next question was, should there be mention of the school fees in the development impact fee schedule? And then in parentheses, she says, I would also lobby that the impact fees for multifamily could be higher. Has there been a comparative analysis with our neighbors? So to answer the first part of the question regarding school fees, yes, in addition to the city's development impact mitigation fees, school fees can be thought of as a constraint on residential development. So we can include that or cite that in the housing element discussion. And as far as the second part of the question regarding the development impact fees and perhaps setting those rates higher, the city is actually in the process of conducting a development impact fee study. And we hope that by the end of the year or the beginning of next year to have that study completed and the current development impact fees updated. Now, we can't change the fees arbitrarily and that's why we're conducting this study. The fees have to be tied to the anticipated impacts from new residential development. So to answer the question, yes, we are going to update our development impact fees, and we hope to do that by the end of the year.
Hey, Paul,
the next question. Yes.
Can I just jump in on that really quickly? Just because as an anecdote, the school fees are established by the school district. So the impact fee study that the city is conducting will provide the assessment, but the impact fee provided by the school district is not something that we have any or much influence over, other than providing information and data to the school district when they develop their fee based on projections for development. So I just wanted to add that anecdote.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And the next question that Commissioner Kelsdorf asked had to do with a proposed project, the Pacific Coast Commons mixed-use project along Pacific Coast Highway between Palm Avenue to the north and Hawley Avenue to the south. So the question is, the density of this proposed site is significantly higher than any of our other zones. Why would we not carry this density along the Pacific Coast Highway sites as well, if there will be a precedent for it? So in response, yes, there is a proposed project, an actual specific plan proposal for a property along PCH. The proposed density there is 84 units to the acre, which is higher than the proposed overlays in the housing element. That particular project will be required through our negotiation process to provide affordable units as part of the development. And that is similar to getting what's called a density bonus that the current state law allows for. So if we think about the proposed overlays in the draft housing element that allow up to a 50 unit per acre density, if we do get projects at those densities, the proponents of those projects could also apply for a state density bonus, which could add a bonus to the density, many more units, which would bring the density a little bit lower, but close to what is being proposed at the Pacific Coast Commons project site. So in response, basically to sum it up, our proposed densities in these overlays anticipate that in some cases, the developer will also tack on additional density that they qualify for under the state density bonus law. So we did not want to set the density so high that if someone applies for a density bonus, it ends up being even higher than the proposed Pacific Commons project. So I hope that provides a good response to that question.
So Paul, I'm sorry, Paul, a little bit of context for that. I don't want to speak for Michelle, but I know that her concern was, and she's very adept in affordable housing development, and she knows this better than all of us. But her concern was 50 units an acre is tough for developers to do, but 80 is much more attractive. And so she was afraid that we might be missing out on deals if the sweet spot of closer to 80 was not obvious to developers.
Well, Jay, there's always the option for developers to come and ask for a specific plan, where we would give the city the leverage to ask for even more lower income housing.
That's
so
right.
If we just give this density away as a matter of right, we kind of lose that negotiating power to try to get, better intersections, better traffic mitigation, all the things we typically do as a planning commission on a project by project basis through the specific plan. But I do, Paul, appreciate your response, and I didn't even think about those state density bonuses kind of piggybacking on what we're doing here today. So that was a good response. Thank you for that.
Also, if I may, I just want to add one last thing about that. What we have right now is a proposed project. So that is not a precedent at this point. And there's no guarantee that project will be approved. It will be considered, it will go through the process, and we hope to get to public hearings fairly soon in the next few months. But it is not a precedent yet. So we don't want to make a decision here in this context based on something that is only a proposal at this time. Okay,
well,
so
very good. But Paul, I would also add, once that project's approved, it's really not precedent for any other project, where we do these case by case based on various factors and public comments and hearings. So we really aren't bound by precedent. Our job is to make the best decision for everyone in the city based on the information we're provided, and that's always something different every time. So sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No problem. So the next question has a little bit to do about our strategy for sort of meeting the state requirements and developing affordable units. The question is, it looks like the strategy for meeting our very low and low income units would be achieved through smaller assembled sites. Can you tell us about this strategy and what the conversation has been with many mansions about how feasible this is? So it is true that our site inventory contains several lots that are small, and we anticipate or hope that they would be assembled into larger parcels. The city doesn't have, in the residential part of town, doesn't have a lot of large sites. So almost by default, consolidating parcels has to be part of our strategy. As far as the feasibility of assembling lots and achieving densities, there are about 5 or 6 sites in the proposed inventory that can be assembled to a point where they produce above 40 or above 40 units or above, which generally speaking can be thought of as a feasible project. Many mansions advised us that, generally speaking, in order for a project to make sense financially, it has to be large enough. You can't do affordable units for a small project of just a few units, 5 or 10 units. You want to have a project that's large enough that produces economies of scale. And in our site inventory, there are several sites that can do that if consolidated, and a few of those sites on their own are large enough to accommodate that. So that kind of is our brief answer to that question. Let me see if there was something else. And I just wanted to mention that when it comes to feasibility, and Veronica mentioned this earlier, we have several programs and policies in the draft housing element, the goal of which is to help incentivize, help facilitate the development of affordable housing. So beyond the actual size of the units or the consolidation process, we have other initiatives such as the inclusionary housing program, the density bonus ordinance that the staff is working on that will be consistent with state law, an ordinance regarding small units or micro units that will help to make units affordable, and development. So there's several other initiatives, including partnering with many mansions to develop that affordable housing strategy that Veronica mentioned. So that's kind of the responses to the questions that Commissioner Kilduff had. With that, did you want to proceed with other public comments, Chair?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Any other questions from the dais for staff before I open public communications? And I see Mr. Paul Morrison has his hand raised. Anyone joining us who wishes to make a comment on public communications, please signify so by raising your Zoom hand. Any other questions from the dais?
Yeah, I've got one last one. Veronica, you mentioned that some of these other cities in California, they're staggering their submittals. Have we learned anything from other city submittals that might affect how we present our housing element to the state? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
It's doing so well this week until now. With unmuting. Yes, doing housing element is like one of my primary kind of business area. We've already gone through quite a few housing elements in the San Diego region, which preceded you, and that's part of the reason why the sites are selected that way. That's the reason why your assessment, the affirmatively fair housing is structured that way. That's the reason why the programs are suggested in a particular way. Those are all based on how we've kind of gotten comments on the state. They've been very, very meticulous in their review, and we expect that. They've been very quite difficult, but that's their job, and we anticipate that.
All right, if there aren't any other questions from the dais, I'd like to invite the public to make public comment at this time. As I stated, we're in a Zoom format, so please, I think, Eduardo, can you help administer this and let me know who would like to speak and give permissions for the public participation portion?
I believe that Mr. Morrison was the first one to raise his hand, so I'll ask Mr. Morrison to unmute himself so he can go ahead and speak.
Oh, hi, my name's Paul Morrison. I've lived in El Segundo for 25 years. I live at 421 Indiana Street, which is right across the street from where PCC South is going to be, is proposed. And the question I had was this. Has the city thought of reimbursing the owner of this property as this project takes effect, if it does? You know, a 2-year project. I've been a construction surveyor, so I know the scope of what's going to happen right across the street from me. And I'm afraid tenants are going to move out and people looking for rentals will drive right by this and go, I'm not going to deal with this headache. Has the city thought of, because this is affordable housing, has the city thought of reimbursing the owners to keep these places viable till after the construction? And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Michael, do you want to address that now, or do you want to wait to end the public comments to address them all at once?
Sure, I mean, we can address it as we go through. If it gets overwhelming, then we can just do it all at the end. But okay. I don't have a lengthy response for that. It's not something that we've considered through the development of the housing element. And as far as I know, and Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not something that's been considered in the current conversations with that development in particular. And we're not here tonight to talk about that development specifically. But maybe it's something that we can explore moving forward on a separate track from tonight's conversation.
So, Mr. Morrison, I would advise you that that project will have its own hearing before the Planning Commission. As a neighbor, you'll receive notice of those. So I would invite you to come back and address your concerns when we're discussing that project specifically.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Paul, do we see anyone else from the public who wishes to address the Planning Commission about the housing element update?
Chair, I don't see anyone raising their hands yet. Perhaps we can give them a moment if they want to do so, and then we'll call on them.
Okay. So again, this is the opportunity for the Planning Commission to hear public testimony from the citizens about the proposed housing element. Anyone on this call who would like to make a comment or ask a question, now's your time to do so. Please just notify us you'd like to speak.
Mr. Morrison still has his hand up. I just want to make sure and confirm whether he has another question or not, or if he doesn't, if he could just lower his hand. Okay. Chair, I don't see anyone else.
I don't either. Okay. Well, then we'll go ahead and close public communication, and all further comments shall come from the dais. Any comments from the planning commissioners? Who wants to start?
I have nothing further to add. I think that we've had some tremendous input. I would like to see East Sepulveda looked at and developed. I agree with you, Ryan. I think that is something that we need to consider and talk about. And I think that there's been clarity about the properties themselves and then the benefit that property owner could yield from it, rather than it being a negative thing. And that's all I have to say for that today. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Brenda.
Yeah, I'll say that, the purpose of tonight is to approve this element to move forward, and the document is very thorough. We all read every page of the 160 pages, and it makes a good case for the state that El Segundo is doing its part to accomplish these difficult residential numbers that we're all facing. So I think it's a well-crafted document.
Thanks, Jay. Kevin, any comments?
Yeah. I think that this is a very well done document, and I think that it definitely meets the needs of the state to get this process going. But I think we all know that housing is an important issue within our city. So I hope that this piece starts a further discussion. What Commissioner Newman brought up about East of Sepulveda, and how, some of the things that I brought up on how we can improve some of the goals and policies. Hopefully, this is one piece of the puzzle for housing. And I think I'm also excited for the next piece of the puzzle, which I think is the mini mansions. I think that a lot is going to come out of that. So good job, staff. And this is what I see as step one to improving some of our housing issues and concerns within the city.
Thank you, Kevin. Without a doubt, we need more housing in El Segundo. And I think El Segundo and everyone in it would benefit from more diversity and more affordable housing. I know I've lost friends who just have to move out of state because they can't stay to live in the town that they love. With that being said, can someone remind me, what were the numbers we had for the last 10-year housing element?
It was 69 units total.
Okay.
I'd have to look up the exact number if you want to do it by category.
That's okay, Paul. The point is, last time we did this, the state asked us to find 69 places for new housing. This time they're asking us to find 492 additional spots, of which there's 29 we're carrying over from our last housing element, which brings us to 521. I've got real concerns about showing the state that we've got more available housing than we really do with the locations. And part of my concern is this idea that any developer, once we approve this and we amend our general plan, we lose control over deciding as a city, the type of project that goes in if someone shows up with 20% lower income. That's an over-the-counter approval with no citizen review, no planning commission oversight. And so my recommendation, and I want to have a discussion with the planning commissioners, is to request staff to reduce this number of housing units we found to the 15% required by the state. Because if we tell them we can do 700 houses, the next time we do this 10 years from now, they're going to ask us to find spaces for 1,400 houses. And we simply just don't have the real estate. And I, for one, do not want to help people in Sacramento destroy the small town of El Segundo. I think that, change is inevitable, change is good, but it also requires input and public participation. And sure, we've been presented this map in a couple different forums, but this is the first time we're being allowed to talk about it. So I agree with Brenda, housing should be something we're talking about on a regular basis, whether it's East of Sepulveda or whatever. And I appreciate the reality of the situation to where we've got our backs against a deadline, a state deadline. And if we don't meet this deadline and pass it by the state, they're going to come in and regulate our city for us. And that's the last thing anybody wants. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I know Paul and staff have been burdened with a lot of different things, and I appreciate the efforts you've done. But my concern is that by just listening to the consultants and saying, well, this is typically what everybody does, is not what's best for our town. So I would request, and I'll, Brenda, Jay, Kevin, tell me if you disagree. I would like to see that buffer zone be as close to that 15% as possible, because we're going to have to send this up and then they're going to send it back. And if they send it back and say, hey, we haven't done enough, okay, now we can open up a couple more spots. But this is going to go back and forth for years, if not decades. So I think we need to be very careful of what we tell Sacramento we're willing to change in our town. You know, so any thoughts on that, Jay, Brenda, Kevin?
Well, I guess I'd like to know what the risk of making it 15%, and I guess we'd need to ask Veronica that. You know, if we do 15%, and I appreciate that that approach, because you're right. I'd rather hold some units back rather than opening them all up at once right now for the state. But you know, what's the risk to this process if we show 15% buffer or even less?
I would not recommend less than 15%, but if that is your desire, we can work with staff to kind of remove some of the sites for now, just to get to the 15%. And if during the negotiation and the comments, they kind of feel like we really don't have enough, we have sites in our back pocket to put back in.
Right, and Jay, this comes back to us. Once it goes up to the state, it comes back to us with the comments, and then we have to finalize it and send it back up again. So
what if we never agree with the state? Does the state sue us, or I mean, what's the ultimate end game if we don't agree upon a housing element?
Well, if you don't have what they consider as adequate sites, you will not get a certified housing element. If you don't get a certified housing element, you do get sued. You could get sued. I shouldn't say you do, but you could get sued by the state or by nonprofits or by housing advocacy groups. That's certainly a reality.
Okay.
Chair Baldino, I need to interject here. I had notified Mr. Samaras earlier today that I have a conflict that I need to run to. We do have a quorum. I would like to interject, so I do need to run with apologies. I will review how this meeting ends later. I would like to see that number reduced. I do agree with you that I don't think we should be overachievers here and just, you know, show all of our cards. I think that it's a strategically makes more sense if we meet what they're actually asking us to provide, to show, and yet we have these other opportunities if they do in fact come back. If we show the first go round and then they say, okay, you have 240, you must have more, and then they ask us to provide more. I just don't think that's wise. I'd like to see a little closer to provide what they're actually asking for, and then if they come back, then we do have some room to move. So with that, my apologies that I need to leave. Have a good
okay, thank you, Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda.
Okay,
right.
okay guys.
Thanks, Brenda.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brenda. Kevin, I'd like to hear your, oh, go ahead, Jay.
No, it's all right, Kevin, please go.
Yeah, Kevin, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, this actually came up during my briefing. I kind of had the same thought. And if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong, that the extra buffer was in there to ensure that we would, if we had to drop, some had to drop, we would get to the number, because that would impact the schedule. So I just want to verify that if we make this change, we do have the opportunity to change it and it doesn't impact the schedule and prevent us from adopting it on time.
We will have to work very quickly because it has rippling effects throughout the document. All the maps, all the AFFH analysis would have to be redone. And so, you know, that's certainly a lot more work on our end to get to it. And we're hoping to get to the state, to send it up to the state by the end of next week.
And Ms. Tam, if I could recommend you look at starting eliminating things west of Main Street, just because the streets are very narrow there. Traffic is already impacted. So those are gonna be difficult for kind of multifamily redevelopment anyway. So that you might wanna look at the sites on Richmond Street first.
Okay.
And also, so for the next housing element, do they decide that number based on what you did previously and just build off of that, or?
No,
they totally make it up.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't necessarily say that's made up, but the methodology is different, the projection is different. A lot of it has to be based on the quote unquote current growth. Current condition, and I'll give you an example. The reason why you had a small number in the fifth cycle was because the fourth cycle, at the tail end of the fourth cycle, when they're developing the fifth cycle arena, the state went into a recession. That's the reason why the number was very small. And the reason why your number is very large this time is because the state passed 2 new bills that says not only do you have to look at accommodate your future housing, you need to build more housing to compensate for the housing that you didn't build in the last 20 years. So that's a legislative change and environment that that may not be there in the future. So it all depends on the political, the economic, and also the market conditions at the time when they developed the arena.
Okay. But I do agree in principle of not giving the state more than we need to. If we can do it on time, then I would be supportive of the proposed change.
All right, sounds like we have a consensus. Jay, do you have a comment?
Well, I just let me just give you another perspective, and this is more about the bigger discussion of housing in El Segundo. And I realize we're trying to get this element approved, and that's important. And but by reducing those numbers, and I realize that has nothing to do with future development. I mean, we can really look at lots of opportunities, whether it's Smoky Hollow, east of Sepulveda, but I feel like we are making a statement about the future of affordable housing in El Segundo. I believe everybody on Planning Commission owns a home. Is that a fair statement? We're already in the system. We all have kids, or many of us have kids, and we wonder how they're going to be able to afford houses. We look at the inclusion numbers, and they're really disappointing. The diversity numbers in this town are disappointing. We can do better. And so when I feel like we are subtracting any opportunities for future affordable housing, we're sort of sending a message to the community that, what's important to us. And I guess I just want to make sure that we're not missing that important aspect of residential opportunities in our town.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm not proposing we reduce this because I'm anti-affordable housing or diversity by any means. I think that makes the city only better. My concern is people from Sacramento telling people in El Segundo what's best for the people who live in El Segundo. So I agree with Brenda. We should be talking about housing all the time. What can we do better? Where are we failing the citizens who live here now? But we can do that on a city level apart from what the state is requiring us to do. So again, we're dealing with this state mandate. We have to do this. And if we don't, we're going to be in trouble with the state. So this is something the state's going to keep coming back, asking for more and more. And I think in order to protect ourselves and what little ability we have left to zone our own city, we need to hang on to that as best we can. So that's why I would say, yes, we want to comply with the state laws. Yes, we want to have this housing element approved, but by no means do I want to offer up more to Sacramento than I think what is required. And who knows, we may come in at 15%, it may get rejected, and the next time we're here, we're talking about other options. But I just, as a point of negotiation, I think it's, you're better going off with what you're willing to do. And if we have to do more, it's something we can talk about.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I wanted to start the conversation by saying, I realize this is to get this element approved.
Yeah.
But let's not lose sight of trying to make housing more affordable to more people in our town.
That's a great point, Jay.
Yeah, they want to chime in and say
Kevin.
Hey. Yes, I finally got back from the airport. Well, I really like that point, Jay. I think that we can. You're saying that what we approve does make statements, on what our values are, and I think that that's something that we should carry forward from this point on. When we do talk about housing, what statements do we want to make about our city and what we value for not just us that are, like you said, already in the system, but getting new people in and growing our city. So yeah, great point.
Well, all right, unless there's any other comments or questions from the dais, we have what here is a receive and file the presentation and a request to amend as directed by the Planning Commission. So I don't think we really need a motion. So any other comments from the dais? Nope. All right, well, once again, thank you, staff, for all your hard work on this. I think we've been pretty clear on the direction we want to see taken going forward on this. And we look forward to it coming, well, actually, it won't come back to us before it goes to Sacramento, correct?
It will. Oh, not this round.
Not this round. So we'll see it again once it goes to Sacramento and we get their comments, correct?
That's correct.
Then we'll have another public hearing and then it'll go to City Council for another hearing?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll get to talk about it even more, which is great. All right, so with that, I don't need a motion to receive and file. It's been received and filed and staff's been directed. Thank you on that. That brings us to our next agenda item is a report from the Director of Development Services. Michael, what do you have for us?
I have exciting news that next month we will be facilitating in person for Planning Commission members only, so long as everybody is committed to adhering to the current LA County health guidelines and wearing a mask while we're in the chambers together. So the meeting will otherwise happen virtually for the public, but the commission themselves, along with staff, may be in the chambers facilitating the meeting next month. So that concludes my report.
Great, thank you, Michael. Okay, next report from the City Attorney's Office. Anything, Greg?
Nothing from me. Nothing from me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And now Planning Commissioner comments. Any additional comments from the Commission?
I don't have any comments, just that I'm looking forward to the in-person meeting.
Yeah, it would be nice to be in the same room and talk about these things as opposed to trying to navigate the Zoom world. I agree. All right. Well, again, heartfelt thanks to staff for all your work on this. This has been quite an endeavor. I appreciate everything you guys are doing for us to make our city better. I appreciate the consultants making sure we stay in line. And next item on the agenda is adjournment. Our next meeting is October 14th, 2020 at 5:30. I believe people will participate by Zoom, but hopefully we'll be in the same room somewhere. All right. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.